Today's episode of the Cloudcast is sponsored by Datadog. Bring speed and scale to your security organization. Datadog Cloud Security Platform delivers real-time threat detection and continuous configuration audits across applications, hosts, containers, and cloud infrastructure. Built on top of the observability platform, Datadog brings unprecedented integration between security and DevOps aligned to shared organizational goals. As a listener to the Cloudcast, you can sign up for a free 2-week trial to see for yourself how Datadog can elevate your cloud infrastructure security posture by visiting datadog.com/security-cloudcast. Sign up now and receive a free Datadog t-shirt. That's datadog.com/security-cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. It is kind of getting to be into the middle of July 2022, and kind of got a lot on my mind. This is another Sunday show, a Sunday Perspective show, and I feel like, I've done some Sunday Perspective show lately. I don't know if they've been necessarily the best ones, although I have gotten some very nice feedback from people. I think some people have some appreciation of just maybe me sharing some lessons learned and some things having been around the industry for a while. So again, it's good to be back doing them. And I said on one of the earlier shows, we were doing a show with Aaron and Brandon, the mid-year show. They asked if I was going to keep doing these things, and I do really enjoy doing them. I said the one challenge is sometimes you run out of ideas, and there's just not something that's immediately coming to mind week to week. That was part of the reason that we moved the format from every Sunday to doing it. It was also, like we said, we had a huge backlog of shows that we wanted to do. This week's a little bit different. I actually have quite a few things that are on my mind and kind of intersect. I think I found when I do these Sunday shows, the ones where there's always 2 or 3 things that are intersecting tend to be the most interesting because they tend to bounce a couple of different ideas into each other, sort of like when a rock hits a calm pond or something like that. You kind of get these ripples, and the ripples are interesting to watch, the direction that they move and the way they intersect with each other. And so I got a few things on my mind. I'm in a very good mood. My father had his 80th birthday, so that's a huge milestone. So happy birthday to him. My oldest daughter is back from she's been gone almost a month now. She's been volunteering at a summer camp. So it's good to have her back. She's getting in an age where she's gone quite a bit. So it's good to have her back. And even though it is blisteringly hot here in North Carolina today, I am spending the day outside cooking, because she's going to be gone again. And it's a chance to do, just a good home cooked meal with the family. So that's been a good day. What I want to talk about today, and I'll dive into it obviously more after the break, but a couple of these intersecting things. I had planned to do a show kind of about this feeling I have when I think about our industry, and I think about my affection for having played sports a lot in the past. And I know different people have different opinions of sports in the tech industry, and some love them and some hate it, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to dig into that a little bit. But also this intersection, somebody had reached out to me and they said, it would be interesting for you to do a show that looks at kind of the interaction that we have, the competitive nature that we have of different people who work in an industry, and sometimes maybe they work on the vendor side of things, or they work for different companies and their companies are competitive. And they said, it'd be interesting to kind of get your perspective, having, worked in different places, how you think about the competitive nature of stuff. And I thought, well, okay, here I have these 2 sort of different sides of the same thing, which is, kind of competitiveness in our industry, and where you fit into the picture, and where your company fits into the picture, and where your alignment with technology fits into the picture, and things like, just your age and where you are and your competitiveness. And so I thought, if I kind of put those things together, that might be a very, very interesting, kind of area to explore. I don't know that there'll be one answer that comes out at the end of this thing, but it's an interesting area to explore, because I think for anybody who has been around this industry for a little while, you've at some point been in some competitive situation. And if you're newer to the industry, you're probably sort of looking at it and trying to figure out a lot of different things and why different companies do what they do. So we're going to look at sort of the competitive nature of our industry, not any specific two companies, but kind of, how competition and those types of things impact people. So we're going to do that right after the break. Today's show is sponsored by Lightstep Incident Response, built on the ServiceNow platform used by over 6,000 companies worldwide. Lightstep Incident Response allows you to scale your incident response team without adding to your monthly bill. With intelligent on-call scheduling and escalations, you get the full context of your service health. Lightstep Incident Response immediately pinpoints issues and uses machine learning to send group text, reducing your time to respond. And you can seamlessly orchestrate alert and incident triage with on-call scheduling across Slack, Teams, Zoom, desktop, and mobile. So get started today with a free 30-day trial of Lightstep Incident Response by visiting lightstep.com/cloudcast. That's lightstep.com/cloudcast. And get a free t-shirt after your first alert or incident. And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to kind of look at a couple of different angles and aspects of the competitive nature of what we do in our industry, both from an individual's perspective, sometimes their relationship to competition, whether they like it or not, and kind of how maybe to think about competition, because whether you enjoy it or not, it does have an impact on what you work on and what your career looks like, and maybe the choices that you make and all those sort of things. So I'm going to kind of start with a couple of the broad brushstrokes of things that it kind of led me to thinking about this topic. The first one was, when I was growing up, the sort of the world that I lived in was very much, it was kids and we were outside and we played sports. And, I'm old enough to remember a time when computers were not sort of an everyday thing. In fact, I think I was maybe 12 or 14 before my family had their first computer, and they really weren't a big deal until I started working. So that'll age me and date me a little bit. But, I grew up playing sports, and I grew up playing fairly competitive sports in different sports at different levels and so forth. And one of the reasons I recall getting into the technology industry, because my background was more business and finance and so forth, as opposed to technology, was I was incredibly intrigued at the time. And again, dating myself, but the industry seemed very competitive, and it seemed like things changed a lot, and there were sort of interesting personalities, and there tended to be winners and losers, although we'll get into what winners and losers means down the road. And so for somebody who had played sports for a long time, and sports had been a big part of my life, kind of the competitive nature of technology was very, very intriguing to me, and maybe more so than other industries that I had looked at, whether it was finance or something else. And so, but what was always interesting to me is, if you have played sports at any level, again, it could be a hobby, it could be whatever, it did always give you something to talk about with a lot of the people in your industry, right? There was kind of commonality. Maybe you'd done those things. But what was always really weird to me, and what I've always struggled with, even though I think people would tend to say that our industry is incredibly competitive, was that the nature of sports and the nature of having played on a team and so forth is usually at the end of a season, which, seasons are different for different sports and different parts of the world and so forth. But at the end of a season, you kind of took stock of how things went. You looked at your record, you looked at individuals and the team and, all those sort of things. And then the season was done. And so whether you had done extremely well or extremely poorly or somewhere in between, that season was done. And there was sort of a break, and you had the opportunity to sort of stop and reassess and make changes as needed. And, from one season to the next, and for those of you that do follow sports, yes, there are teams that seem to be cursed, and there are teams that seem to win championships all the time. But the reality is, in any given season, the team and the players are unique. They could be a certain age, they could be of a certain skill set, they could be injured or not injured. They could have a certain coach. I mean, there's all sorts of variables that go into any given team and any given season, not to mention who they're playing against and the makeup of who they're playing against and all sorts of things, the schedule, the order of the schedule, the weather and all sorts of things. But at the end of that season, the season was done. And when the next season rolls around, or the next time that the competition rolls around, it essentially starts over. It starts from scratch. And what I mean by that is the people that are on the team could be completely different. Their ages could be different. Things could have changed the team for various reasons. Salary, or somebody got traded, or somebody got injured, or somebody better moved up into a position, or the new coach, or whatever it might be. And so there was always a sense of sort of rejuvenation that happens, or does still happen in sports, because you do have these distinct sort of stops and starts. Season starts, season stops, and then it resets and it moves forward. And what's always been weird to me is there's so much in our industry that tends to sort of compare, technology to the competitiveness of sports, right? There's winners and losers, and we try and have kind of score boards, if you will. In some cases, scoreboards could be how much money some company makes, or how many people they hire, or how much funding they take, or whatever it might be, a number of GitHub stars. There's all sorts of metrics that go with it. But the one thing that really doesn't happen is there are no restarts. There are starts, and there are distinct ends, but they're not in any way coordinated. They're not timed, right? So a company could start up and they could be tremendously successful, and they could run indefinitely, Microsoft or Oracle, or, maybe AWS, who knows, right? There are distinctly companies who start, and due to failure, they end, or due to acquisition, they end. But there's no time of the year when those things happen. And so it's really weird from a competitive perspective to sort of think about this sort of infinite competition in which you never really kind of get to reset. You tweak, you change, but the game never really sort of stops and pauses and does those sort of things. And so it's always been, for me, kind of a weird thing to compare it to, because a lot of times, especially even in technology, as we describe technology to new people, we use analogies that might not be technology to kind of put it into context for people. And so again, maybe what I need to do is think about, the competition of our industry as something other than sport. Because like I said, it doesn't have a concept of seasons. It doesn't have a concept of resetting. There's no trading of players. Yes, people leave a company and go somewhere else, but when somebody leaves a company, it tends to leave a void at the first company, and the second company tends to be better off because that person is there, and so forth. And I guess there's just sort of like trades, because somebody might backfill a job or something. Now, the other interesting aspect of competition, and that's, I was looking at that from kind of a seasonality perspective, was somebody asked me and they said, hey, when you do one of these Sunday Perspective show, could you maybe give some perspective, some thoughts, having worked at a number of companies, and I've worked at large companies. I've worked at places like Cisco and NetApp and Red Hat, and I'm trying to think some other places that were large. But I've also worked at some tiny places. I worked at VirtuStream, and the company I work for now, Solo, is a smaller, starting, growing company, and some companies in between. I worked for Linksys, which was kind of an in between company, and what's interesting is, in our industry, we tend to, at least at a company level, to hopefully, the focus of what you do is to try and, create something, build something, service something that your customers or the market recognizes as valuable, and you're able to do it in a way that, is profitable and people can make money and sustain themselves and all those sort of things. But we also have a tendency, if you work for a vendor, for example, or you work for some kind of company that makes something that's then going to go try and sell something, you tend to go to market, and the customers that you work with, the clients that you work with, typically go, well, I probably am never going to buy anything in which there's only one company that does that. And so there's these natural competitive natures that happen in which, there's oftentimes many companies, multiple companies, maybe it's only two, but maybe it's 4 or 5 or 6 in some segment of the industry that are all competing against each other. And what was interesting in this comment, or this question that this person asked me, was, they said, can you kind of separate the competitive nature that the two companies have that maybe compete in the same space, and maybe your individual feelings that you have about the people that work at the other company? And what they basically said was, they said, hey, look, when I worked at company X, we made a technology, and there was another company, Y, that we competed against. And he said, when we were there, the kind of corporate mantra was, what we're doing is right, what we're doing is the best, because that's what companies do. They tend to sort of want to position themselves as the best, and that the people they compete against, most of what they do is bad, even though it might be in the same domain. He said, but what was interesting was we took that a step further, and we, in our mind, portrayed the idea that those people that worked at that other company were bad. And he said, what's been a really interesting learning lesson, because he had left this company not too long ago, maybe a few years ago. And he said, when I used to go to events and I used to go to trade shows and stuff, we would avoid those people, or we wouldn't necessarily think to engage with them, even if sometimes maybe they were working in the same open source community or whatever. There was always a certain amount of sort of natural competition. And he said what's been really interesting to him is, as things have evolved over the last few years, and he's not necessarily in this direct competition anymore, how much he realizes as he talks to those people, or people that worked for that company, or people that were sort of adjacent to that area, how much he realizes that they're really just kind of doing the same thing. They're very much the same sort of people. And he kind of was saying, I'm not totally sure anymore why we let ourselves take the competitive nature of it beyond the company level, or even sometimes the technology level, to the personal level. He said, that looking back on it in hindsight, it's one of those sort of lessons learned, like, what were we doing? And I think it's an interesting lesson, because, in our industry, again, whether you work for, say, like a technology vendor, or maybe you're in the automotive industry. So I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, where everybody and their families somehow were associated with one of the big three car companies at the time, General Motors, Ford, or Chrysler. And, there was some animosity between one or the other, and people didn't necessarily jump from one to the other as much as they do like in the technology industry. And I'm sure there's a certain amount, I know in the banking industry and financial services industry, I see people bounce around all the time. They're at JP Morgan, and then they're at Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, and then they're at Bank of America and somewhere else, and Wells Fargo, or wherever it might be. And so, I think you kind of have to think about your career at various stages in time. There's going to be a time when you're in a job, and the competitive nature of that job is going to create a natural competitor. And I say competitor maybe more than enemy, because I think enemy sometimes, we find times in leadership when they go, hey, we do best when we have an enemy. We all have a common enemy in our company. And I think it's fine to say, hey, we have a common competitor, right? We have somebody else in the market who's trying to service the same place that we do. We're trying to go after the same customers. We're trying to solve the same thing. But I think, if I was, as somebody who's been around the industry for a little while, I would say to be very careful with that sort of mindset. And I've been on the other side of that mindset as well. I've told people before, I've taken jobs before, and due to various circumstances before that job, I went into the job with distinctly not only looking at another company as my competition, but distinct individuals as people that I was like, I want to beat that person for various reasons, and I won't go into the details. But, I think you got to be a little bit careful of that, because what we've seen, and I've seen this over, a number of years in the industry, is early on, there were people who stayed at companies for a very long time. It was kind of the model that I grew up with, my parents grew up with. You worked for a company, you started sort of at the bottom, and you evolved over time. And, the company invested in you, you had opportunities to grow with it. You return the loyalty back to them by staying with them. And that doesn't seem to necessarily happen anymore. And it's been kind of changing over the last 15, 20 years. You would stay at a company for 10 or 15 or 20 years. When I first started at Cisco, there were people who had been there for a very long time. And then maybe one of the next places I had gone, even though it was a bigger company, there were people who were there for 10 or 12 years, and they felt like they had been there for a really long time. And now, you go somewhere and stay 5 years, and if you're interviewing somewhere, people are like, wow, you've been there for a really long time. And you think, yeah, I guess 5 years seems like a long time. Maybe it's as long as you're in university or something, but it's not that long. But it's what you realize, and where I'm going with this is, if you start creating these sort of competitive things in your mind, and sometimes what happens with competitive situations is, you're looking to win. There's always winners and losers, or people that do better than others, or companies that do better than others. But when you start creating situations in which, they're enemies to you, it does put you at a distinct disadvantage. It puts you at a disadvantage because at some point in your career, especially if people are moving every 3, 4, 5 years, or whatever their time cycle is, unless you're moving out of the industry, or you're moving distinctly from one part of the industry to another part of the industry, there's a very good chance that you're going to end up working with people who, were on the other side of that competitive barrier in your mind, that competitive situation in your mind. And again, oftentimes those things go away when you work together and you realize, oh, okay, we're on the same team now, we're on the same side, we're working together. But I think the other kind of comment I would make is, you got to be a little careful of that, because sometimes you have it in your mind that not only, are those people wearing the different color jersey than you are, if you will, but that they don't know what they're talking about. And so much of the time when you get into a situation, and I don't care if you're, working in technology, or working in a restaurant, or you're working at whatever, you didn't necessarily establish a lot of the things that are there. And, you're working at a place where, if they've been there for a while and they've been successful, the things that they chose to do were chosen for a reason. And if they've been around for a while, they've probably been successful for a reason. And, so you got to be a little bit careful in associating, past choices with the individual, with the competitive nature. And again, as I kind of wrap this up and I think about, kind of the where I'm going with all this is, I don't encourage anybody to say, look, I'm not going to sort of learn kind of the competitiveness that goes on in our market, because every single one of us deal with it every day, whether it's I'm competing to get the best salary, I'm competing to get the best title, I'm competing to just work with the people that best fit what I want to do, and realize that, there's only so many jobs in our industry that are the best fit for you. And they're, if they're great jobs, if they pay really well, they're in a fun city, you get to work on interesting things, you work with fun people, whatever it is that motivates you, there's typically just there's going to be a finite number of those. Because like with anything, the things that are in high demand, there's a scarcity for them. So, where I'm going with all this is, I'm not by any means saying like, hey, don't be competitive. You tend to succeed in this industry by understanding how to be good at what you do, hopefully by making good choices that align to the things that are interesting to you and that best align to your skill set, best align with your ability to get along with the people that you work with, or, deliver a capability that's in high demand. But at the same time, recognizing the bigger picture of things, you're going to end up working with probably a broader segment of the industry, broader set of people, broader set of companies over a longer period of time. And if you create these sort of distinct, unbreakable, can't be undone sort of mindsets of competitiveness, and you move from the mindset of competitiveness to people are complete enemies. Again, remember that unlike sports, in which there are distinct ends to the season, there are no real ends to the season in technology, right? We talk all the time about companies who have, technologies that have been around forever and technical debt and stuff. Our seasons don't end in the technology industry. They sort of continue from quarter to quarter and year to year and so forth. So, unlike sports where you could go, look, I give up on a team, or, hey, we don't like that anymore, we're going to trade somebody, or I'm going to, whatever. You have to kind of remember that the tech industry and business in general kind of just keeps rolling along. And, so if you're going to be like most people in our industry, which means you'll change jobs, you'll change managers, you may, take other jobs of people you've worked with before. And, the technology that you will work on, I guarantee it, no matter how cool you think it is right now, will become old at some point in time, maybe in 5 or 6 years, maybe in 10 years, who knows? And a distinctly different viewpoint will probably eventually take over, whatever segment of the industry that you're in, or at least a very different segment, different viewpoint will take over, some aspect of disrupting what you're in. And so, you want to be conscious that if your goal is to have a long career in this industry and hopefully, one in which you have the flexibility to do what you want to do and work where you want to work and work with the kind of people or the technologies you want. You got to be a little careful to not be, completely hung up on the idea that everything is competitive, all the way from the companies you work with to the people you work with to the technologies you work with. I think you're going to find as you open your mind a little bit, get to know some people on the other side of the fence, the other side of whatever your competitive nature is, that they're trying to do a lot of the same things. And, there's a lot of opportunities to learn from those people, whether or not you agree with them or adopt what they're doing. But our industry tends to, kind of go in circles and rhyme and repeat itself and things like that. So anyways, the competitive nature of our industry is interesting. It's not like sports. It can become very personal, probably shouldn't become personal. But if you're thinking bigger picture and you're thinking about, where do I want to be in 5 years and 10 years? And do I want to stay in this industry for a long period of time? My one piece of advice would be, step back from time to time and recognize, what part of competitiveness you're in the middle of, if it's individual or technology or group or company, and kind of think about, how much are you emphasizing that versus, something else that might be helping you try and evolve your career and be in the right place 5 years from now or 3 years from now or the next job or 2 jobs from now. So, because I've seen the competitive nature of things, create some hardships for people. And I don't know that they necessarily intend to do it, but sometimes the circumstances create that for them. So anyways, there was a lot involved with there, a lot of talk about competition. And again, if competition is not your thing, that's fine. I've seen lots of people who do extremely well and don't want to get in the middle of it. It's a little bit like politics. But be aware of what your context is. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Kind of a fun Sunday perspective, at least for me, to sort of think through a couple of these things that feel like they intersect each other. And I'm going to get back to working on a cook for the family. So they're home for a couple of days, which makes me happy. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all. I hope you're having a good summer. Hope you're having a good summer vacation. Hope things aren't as hot where you are as it is here in North Carolina. Thanks to everybody for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the show. And we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.